So everyone is being a little bit shy, but I'm going to invite our panelists to come up and sit down. And I'll just spend a few minutes introducing each of them. And I have a series of questions that I'd like to pose. And being the moderator, I get the privilege of being first to go. And then I'll open up the questions to the rest of you, because I'm sure you all have interesting things to say. I'm still kind of digesting everything that went on. It was a very heavy film, and I'm still feeling the drama of the lottery at the end. That is quite something. So first of all, we have Dr. Linda Nathan. Hi, I'm well, nice to meet you. Who's the founding headmaster of Boston Arts Academy, the city's first and only school for the visual and performing arts. Under her leadership, the school has won state, national, and international recognition. Boston Arts Academy sends over 90% of its graduates, all residents of Boston, to college. Dr. Nathan was also a driving force behind the creation of the Fenway High School, recognized nationally for its innovative educational strategies and school-to-work programs. She's co-founder and board member of the Center for Collaborative Education in Boston, a nonprofit education reform organization dedicated to creating more equitable, democratic schools. She's been recognized through many awards and fellowships, including being named as a Barr Foundation Fellow for her work in social entrepreneurship and leadership in 2007. And she received the Godine Medal for service to the community by the Massachusetts College of Art and Design. And her book, The Hardest Questions Aren't on the Test, Lessons from an Innovative Urban School, is to be released this month, I believe.
It's out. You
it's
gotta buy
out.
It.
Go and buy it.
Go to the school.
Absolutely. Make it happen. So welcome, Linda.
Thank you.
Next to Linda is Jim Burke. He's the CEO of Participant Media, a global media company focused on entertainment, which inspires social change. And I want to talk to him a little bit more about this. Participant has released 27 films, including Good Night, Good Luck, An Inconvenient Truth, The Visitor, The Kite Runner, The Informant, Countdown to Zero, and obviously Waiting for Superman. Among Jim's many careers, in a previous life, he served as principal of Alexander Hamilton High School and was the youngest principal in the history of the Los Angeles Unified School District. Jim believes that a good story, well told, can truly make a difference in how one sees the world. So welcome, Jim.
Thank you.
And last, and obviously you've got a big fan entourage here from the applause, Thaxton Lundy, who is a second-year master's in public policy student at the Harvard Kennedy School. He's focusing on education policy, social innovation, and city government. He began his career as an associate in Chancellor Joel Klein's correspondence office at the New York Department of Education, and obviously he was featured in our film more prominently than you let on before.
I hadn't seen it yet.
Mr. Lundy spent the past summer exploring his policy interests, first addressing teacher absenteeism for the Pittsburgh Public Schools Office of Talent Management, and then designing and implementing a citywide public service and volunteerism initiative for the mayor's office in New Orleans. So, Jim, Thaxton, welcome. So I'm going to actually start with you, Jim. And I'd be interested if you could walk us through the social action campaign for this film. And how do you think of or conceptualize a campaign? And is it possible to identify common interests of every successful campaign?
Good evening, everybody. In terms of the campaign, it really starts at inception when we look at the types of films that we want to make. And we kind of, in a little bit, we're a bit of a fortune teller in a sense that we look at what's percolating out in terms of a pressure that's building in terms of certain issues. And when we identified education, which obviously I have a personal background in history, and we approached Davis Guggenheim to make this film, and coming off the success that we had with An Inconvenient Truth with Davis, we figured he'd be the perfect guy. If he can take on global warming, he can take on the American education system. And he ran out of the office screaming, pretty much. He said, there's no way you can take on this topic. It's a big blob. It is unapproachable. It is unfixable. It's too big and abstract for people to get their arms around. And if you know Davis at all, once he gets his you get a bug in his mind, he can't let go of it. And so over a period of weeks, he came back with his producing partner, Leslie Chilcott, and said, All right, I'll take it on. Here's the deal. You have to greenlight a film. I don't know what it's going to be about. I can't tell you what the topic is. All I know is we have to let the world know about the American education system, which I need to tell you I don't really know that much about, other than the film he had made looking at 4 first-year teachers called First Year. So at the same time that Davis started to really immerse himself in the research on the issue, we started to immerse ourselves in terms of what type of coalition could we build for a film of which we have no idea what the film is. And as Davis was collecting footage and developing his ideas and concept and in getting a sense of really where the focus of the film would be, we started to coalesce a group of NGOs who are both experts in the reform movement, experts in policy, and now there's about 160 of them actually involved in the social action campaign. And we developed what we call pillars. So 4 principles that we think are the common foundations of what will be a massive national social action advocacy campaign. In this particular case, it focuses on literacy, it focuses on innovative schools, it focuses on great teachers, and it focuses on rigorous focus on standards. And then behind those are actually specific goals that are created within those goals. Drop the literacy, it's a decreased an improvement rate of 10%, or 30 schools passing Common Core standards and fully implement 30 states and fully implementing them, or additional removals of caps of innovative schools and charters and magnets and other programs that demonstrate success. And the program then becomes like a political campaign. So we actually have field operatives in 25 cities. We have a massive national presence with waitingforsupermen.com, which allows you actually get involved at a local level. You can get, through the mobile texting, which you would have seen on the end credits, you actually are able to follow what goes on based on where your phone is from. It'll give you updates of what education policy is going on in that area. You can then speak to a specific person to find out specific things you want to do. You can find out the ratings of your local schools. You can, so every school in the nation is rated. You can find out, there's a series of letters that you can write to both governors and your representative senators that are based on Common Core standards and other educational activities coming up. We'll do probably 300 screenings across the country, including 50 state legislators. And then what you want to do is you're trying to create this moment of inspiration. And I'll finish up. And in this moment of inspiration, you want to get people to activate. And then with that activation, you're then want to transact on that activation and getting them to be emotionally connected. So the first piece is you have to become inspired. And then if you're inspired, then we want to give you the tools to become active and get involved. We're not a solution-based company. We're not partisan. We don't have, and I'm sure there'll be questions about the film being pro this or anti that. But for us, the issue is if on a Thursday night, you're talking about education across multiple schools at Harvard University, that's what we wanted. If it all week long it's on MSNBC, if the President of the United States is talking about education Monday, if people across the country are talking about this, if Oprah's running 2-hour shows on this, if Larry King spends an hour on it last night, that means education is raising up in its visibility. And we fundamentally believe that with the campaign, we have to put enough pressure on the system not to tinker with it, but actually to do some very dramatic change.
So how would you then go about measuring? I'm hearing a little bit, but how do you measure that you have been successful?
We'll look, in every film we do, we look at specific measurable results. So we'll look at laws passed, we'll look at amount of people or activists staying engaged and involved, we'll look at all the, what I call the passive measurements, which are letters written, all of the, those types of things which are less important to me. Right now, for instance, there are over 10,000 people that are debating across all of our platforms online on about 15 different topics. There's 150,000 people who've already signed up who are specifically targeting to become activists in their communities. That's the pledge meter that if you go on, you'll start to pledge. There's a series of almost $15 million of monies that are then driven by those pledge pieces. So we look at actual financial support. We look at legislation and laws and changes that occurred. We look at, well, the film covers what you saw in Washington, D.C. in the Union. Well, surprise, there's now a new contract in Washington, D.C. where the teachers are now judged in a different way, and there's a break in that piece of tenure. The rubber room is closed in New York. Teachers are still flying around. but the rubber room was closed. You're starting to see a break in some of the system, in some of the negotiations across some of the district systems. So those are the types of things that we look at. And then we actually have an independent university and a research body actually audit the film and take a look at the results and the impact that occurred. So it's pretty extensive.
Terrific.
Called a return on capital, return on social capital employed.
I love it. I love it. Linda, I maybe want to move to you as we talk about how this film begins to have an impact. And where do you see this film, as we kind of think more about our local Boston community, where do you see it having an impact on education outcomes for us? And what do you hope that it will accomplish here in the Boston area?
Well, first of all, when I found out that you made Food Inc., my opinion of this movie changed. So I got to see it last night in the pouring rain. And I just want to make sure I do a shout out. I know it's really terrible to shout out about your own book, but my kids are really waiting for the royalty money. So you really do have to wait. The money is going to my students. And they have all sorts of
Did you bring any with you?
No, I couldn't, but it's in all the bookstores and it's in paperback and it's cheap and now you can go get it yourselves. So what I would say, I would add how I would want to see this movie change education is I would add to your 4 things. So I would say, I'm interested in literacy, and we have huge issues in literacy in our country, but I would want to see us talking about literacy and creativity at the same time. I think we do our kids a horrible disservice, and we didn't see that in this movie either, of not making it a right for every child to have an arts education in this country. And I don't just say that because I'm the head of the Boston Arts Academy. I say that because it's a crime that every child is almost guaranteed, if you don't live in the suburbs, not to have instrumental music education. Dance is part of their curriculum, theater is part of their curriculum, visual arts. So I want there to be a public outrage, because we're never going to get, I really don't believe, having seen the Finnish schools and the amount of creativity in those schools, the amount of direct arts instruction in the Finnish schools, we're not going to get to high levels of literacy without high levels of arts. So I'm very grateful to be in a school system with a superintendent who has made arts one of her #1 priorities. And I'd like to see that discussion happening across the country.
And by the way, on October...
Thank you. You can applaud. And I want to add...
I just want to tell you one thing that just, as somebody who founded a magnet school for the fine arts in LA, I want to tell you that on October 18th at the Wang Center is Elton John, Leanne Russell on concerts around Waiting for Superman to promote arts education that is a mandate in every school.
Fabulous.
So that whole thing is going to bring focus on that particular element. So it's coming your way.
And then with the innovative schools, what I'd be very careful of with that platform, because I think what I worry about, and I've written about this, is the notion of teacher or principal as hero. And so how many of you are in the public schools right now? Charter, whatever, public, private, whatever. So you know what I'm talking about. And I think, Geoffrey Canada is someone I greatly admire, but not everyone's going to be a Geoffrey Canada. And so I really worry about that message, that innovation means you have to somehow be either a missionary or a hero. So I would want to talk about innovative schools that really understand collaboration and the development of professional learning communities and what that looks like. And I'm really happy to have a researcher from Harvard who's coming to look at that notion of collaboration in our school. So I worry a little bit. I love the word innovation, but I worry about what it sends, particularly to people coming out. And then I loved what you said about great teachers, because I think that is the key. So for me, the outcry should be with, and this is a place where I feel not in Boston, not in our policies, not anywhere. There was a teeny period in Massachusetts where we said, we want to take second career people and we're willing to pay them more, we're willing to forgive loans, and we want them to go into teaching. It didn't work. The Finnish do have that part right. It really is true that the top third go into public education. We don't have that right. That ought to be, folks who know Massachusetts, Fitchburg State still produces more teachers than any other institution in Massachusetts. And then I would say, when you said standards, I would just want to flip that and say, yep, but what I'm really interested in, and I didn't get it here enough, is the question about student engagement and teacher engagement. So I'm really interested in What does it take to create that relationship between teachers and students? And some of you I do know in the room really know how to do, and I missed that. It wasn't nuanced for me, and that's got to be what we all are talking about. And the other piece that I loved that we don't see enough of, and that I think in Boston we're really working on, we now have a parent university in Boston, it's really pretty cool, is that question of what does parent engagement look like? And I sort of got pulled into it in the film, but not in the ways, and that may, do you want me to stop?
Yeah,
and
no,
we'll
no,
come
go
at
ahead.
that later. But I feel like, at least in my 32 years in public education, I have a sense, a little bit, of what it takes to engage parents. And I think that the first lesson is, don't expect parents to come up to the school. In fact, that language is the way parents talk. Parents talk about coming up to the school. I'm really interested in all the ways that teachers and administrators go out to parents. And that's a conversation we still haven't had. You know, our parents, most of them have 3 jobs. So we don't have a parent council, we have a family council. That's really an important distinction. And why do we get 85% of family members to twice-a-year narrative conferences? Because the kids come. So it's a kid family member advisor thing. That's a very nuanced way. And what I got from this was the desperation, but not the kind of strategies that I think lots and lots of schools really have. So I'll stop for a minute, sorry.
And I want to come back to this because I like this concept of engagement. And it sounds like there's 2 levels of engagement, one between the parents and the school, another between the students and the teacher. And I'd like to explore this a little bit more. Thaxton, I'd be curious to hear from you, given your experience in different public school systems, whether or not there are current challenges within the system that you feel perhaps weren't addressed in the film that you would like to have seen be explored in the context of this film.
So, first of all, I'm so pumped to be here. Thank you for thank you for listening to me talk about some of my experience.
Don't you go to school here?
I do.
Okay.
I do. Yeah, Jason helped me out, got me in this chair. So, and let me also say that my experience in districts and charters is pretty minimal. I worked for 2 years in Chancellor Klein's mailroom, replying to his mail. I then spent this past summer for 2 months working in the HR department in Pittsburgh Public Schools, and then for the last 3 years before school, I worked in a charter school. So I've got a different kind of perspective on things, but I by no means have a wealth of knowledge. So you know, I think. You know, we thought about autonomy, and I'll answer your question sort of indirectly, but we thought about autonomy at our school in some pretty basic ways. We thought about autonomy when it comes to how we spend money. We thought about autonomy about who we hire, the people that we get into our building. And we thought about autonomy from the perspective of what we teach. And that's essentially, in this clip, that's essentially how I explained it to our families. You know, we thought about the freedom that we were given in those 3 basic columns of things. So that meant, you know, sort of providing our teachers with the materials they needed, or getting them into the conferences that they needed to go to, or finding the stuff that we needed to provide for our kids around student culture, which I'll talk about in a little bit, on the financial side. On the hiring side, it meant that someone like me could exist. So in our school, we used a dual leader model where we had a principal and we had a director of operations. And essentially, my job was to make sure that our principal was thinking about instruction, curriculum, making sure our teachers had the training they needed, and making sure that our kids were learning, they were getting the instruction they needed. Everything else, more or less, came to me. So busing and food, and paying bills from Staples, and doing scheduling, and making sure that kids had uniforms on, and making sure that lights worked, or toilets worked, or whatever it is. And this was the sort of, this is the very basic idea, but it's essentially, I wanted to make sure that my principal could focus on what she needed to focus on, and that was making sure that our kids were getting the education they needed, making sure our teachers had the support they needed. So that, in terms of the hiring piece, meant that, you know, we reorganized the responsibilities so that I could be there to make sure that my principal could do what she needed to do. And then on the curricular side, we wrote our curriculum that was based on state standards. Our teachers created it. We tweaked it from year to year. We were within a network of schools where we sort of shared things that were working, things that weren't. So, you know, the sort of instructional piece was you know, without a whole lot of requirements about what it needed to look like or not, we were able to design it from there. So all of that autonomy is completely meaningless, in my opinion, if we're not getting our kids to perform, and we're not creating a culture in our school of excellence, both instructionally for our kids, but also for our teachers. A culture where they want to be there at 6:30 in the morning, they want to be there on Saturday. We have a 3-week-long orientation in the summer, so essentially our teachers are off for a month, and many of our teachers work around the year during a summer writing academy. But, you know, sort of creating this sort of culture around autonomy that is, you know, it may not be my job, it may not be in my job description, but this is the type of work that we need to do to create a great school. So I think, you know, we thought about autonomy in those ways, and I think, you know, my limited experience in the Department of Ed at New York and also in Pittsburgh was that a lot of teachers that I spoke to and principals, I actually visited Westinghouse, which is, I don't know if anybody's familiar with Pittsburgh, but Westinghouse and Oliver are the two schools that kind of get clumped into the same category in Pittsburgh. And had the opportunity to spend an afternoon with the principal there, and, you know, at Westinghouse, and you know, the entire conversation revolved around how she was hamstrung to do things. Now, whether that's union or whether that's funding or whether that's you know, the type of manager or leader that she is, there are a lot of different components to that. But, you know, I think I felt like it was an honor to be given the responsibility that I had in my school, and it was an honor for me to try and find families to inform them about the opportunity to come to our school. And so, you know, it was something that I took very seriously, and something that...
I can interrupt.
Yeah.
You talked about going out there. You're doing almost like you're recruiting kids in these neighborhoods.
Right.
And so can you talk to us a little bit about that recruitment, and then to play in the lottery, the drama of which I'm still kind of getting, that was very powerful. And so what do you think about going out and recruiting these kids, and you're basically trying to recruit them from other schools, then have them play in this lottery, and we see I mean, I think it's more difficult to get into some of those schools than it is to get into Harvard College.
So I think the most basic point is that I despise the lottery. I don't want a lottery in my school. I wish in any school. I wanted to be able to provide every kid and every family that I talked to a seat in our school. We accepted 75 students each year in our 5th grade. We got about 3 times as many applicants as we had spots, and the lottery was a devastating process. Mm-hmm. I was responsible for making sure that the lottery ran without error. And from time to time, people who wanted to know about lotteries wanted to come and visit to sort of watch this process, what you saw on the screen. It was a very difficult process to be responsible for and to manage and to watch happen. There were cheers and there were lots of tears. And so, you know, as an administrator and as someone who was responsible for trying to find families to get into the school, very complicated mess of emotions that go with that. My feeling on this, outside of the policy, outside of the Kennedy School, outside of Harvard, my feeling on this was a really basic one, and that was we were really fortunate to have the opportunity to provide a great school, and we had a lot of people who were excited to support it and work really hard to make it great. Merely existing to me seemed at the best irresponsible, at the worst unethical. And I felt like it was my responsibility to go out and talk to people about it existing. And I will tell you, the clip sort of shows me flying into nail salons and to bodegas to hand out flyers, and that was one aspect of it. But, you know, I really felt like I was spending as much time talking about what charter schools were or weren't as I was about Williamsburg Collegiate, which was the school that I worked at. So I spent a lot of time talking about how lotteries worked and whether charter schools were private and why they should pick our school over a district school, or why they wanted to pick a district school over a charter school, or what they had heard about charter schools. So,
Sure, please.
Sorry. Go ahead. No,
I'm just going. Sorry.
You're on a roll.
I'm just talking.
No, what I was saying is one thing that you just mentioned, which is very important. Charter schools are public schools, just so we're clear on the vernacular. Charter schools are public schools. They're funded with public dollars. That's why they have these lotteries. The other piece of this that's important is this film was not made for education experts. This film is made to galvanize and inspire and emotionally connect with and create an interest in an audience who doesn't have a vested interest in their mind. Their children are gone, their children are in private school, it's not my kids, it's other people's children. If we can create a moment where people will feel a collective responsibility for all the Daisies and the Anthonys, then we have a chance of sparking a movement, because there are always amazing public programs, public traditional programs, magnet programs like yours, which I know of, but 28% of 8th graders in Boston public schools are reading at level. Yet, what do? We try really hard, and then we take 2 months off, and then we start over again and do the exact same thing. In what business can you survive in which you can do the same thing every year, fail at it, and then take a couple months off to rest, and then do the exact same thing again? And that's the fundamental structural issue, and that was, if there was any one thing, going to your first question, a point of the film, it was to say that if we talk about, shifting this and moving this and tweaking this, we're rearranging chairs on the Titanic. This problem was decades in the making. This is not about one teacher, one principal, one anything. This is about a system that is completely broken. So if some of the things that are taboo, like length of school day, measurement and accountability, length of school year, evaluation of teachers, you know this. I was 21 years old, I started teaching in South LA. 23, I was tenured for life. I was done.
So,
that was it.
Can I just say something about this? Because I think where the film becomes difficult for those of us who have spent our entire life here is, I don't disagree with anything you just said just now, at all. And I went into education to create the revolution. It was just as bad in 1975 as, these issues have not changed. But I guess, and I don't want to critique filmmaking because I don't understand it, but I guess I would have wished for more nuanced showing of it, because I think it's somewhat irresponsible to just have it be charter schools, for example. Right. And I just feel like no one called me. I'm not a charter school.
But you know why Davis used that, though? No. First of all, if he made the film he wanted to make, it'd be 13 hours long, covering all of the different elements.
He could have found.
I'm just, and that's the one piece. And the second piece is the idea of what you said about the lottery. Any child who has to go through a lottery, magnet school lottery, that isn't, or has to leave and escape to go to private school, that's a tragedy.
Most school systems are done by lottery.
Right.
So, to me, that's not the issue we should be discussing.
No, what I'm saying is every child's entitled to a quality education.
I agree. But to focus on, to me, where we get focused in this film and where we get drawn in is this lottery. And that is like, I don't know, a straw man. It's like not the issue. The issue to me is what you said earlier, is how do we think about really engaging families, kids, and teachers? And again,
how do you storytell that in a powerful and impact way?
Yeah.
And so this particular Academy Award-winning director approached this vehicle in order to, and I hear what you're saying, because you could go, I agree with you, that you
I'd
could
like
go
to
on.
move to the issues that you're raising, whether the film does it or the film doesn't.
Right.
I love the idea, and maybe this is where your organization can be really helpful. I haven't been on the website to see all the ways you could sign up, but I sure hope that what I learn when I sign up is that there is a plethora of amazing schools, charter, private, public.
Yes, the answer is yes.
Okay, good. That you get involved with, and I hope that the questions that I, as a viewer, begin to get asked. Because I think parents, this would be such a service if there was a list of questions that every parent should ask when they go into schools. We need like really basic stuff. I get calls all the time, parents saying, when I go into a school, what should I look for? What should I ask? That, to me, would really, really engage. Right now, we have parents that are so stressed out that the idea of even asking a question of a principal or a teacher is the furthest thing from their
Just remember
mind.
that charters don't own, I think you'd agree with this, or maybe you won't, but charters don't own successful schooling.
No, I agree.
You know, what the focus or the points that come out is if you extend the school day,
Yes, I love
immerse
that.
the students
I
in a rigorous curriculum,
Yeah.
which means there has to be some evaluation, testing of performance. If you do, and you put the best people on the front line, both
agree.
administrative, teachers, and principals, you're going to have success in any type of environment, in a trailer in the parking lot. You put those elements in place, and so nobody owns that formula. Hopefully, what was communicated was those elements. If we do those, that we can fix this thing, because that's the good news. It's not like there's no solution. There is a solution. It's happening, as Jeffrey Kenner says, everywhere across the country in pockets. It just can't be exceptions to the rule. It has to be the rule, which means there has to be systematic change.
So one thing that has come up in what each of you has said indirectly is this notion of a new culture in education, you with your engagement, and then both of you, in fact, you mentioned specifically culture and this change in culture. And I'm wondering how this film helps us to begin, whatever this new culture is. All three of you have either directly or indirectly referenced it. And maybe, Linda, I'll start with you. What is this new culture? And how does this film help us to bring
there?
about, because myself being an organizational scholar, cultural change does not happen overnight. And in particular, when it's the actors
I think
aren't
you have
changeable.
to start with helping people ask questions. And so I'm not going to critique the film because I don't feel like I'm, because it didn't, for me, help me ask good questions. That's me. And your other films did. So this one didn't. So I would want to know if we could have sort of a common school agreement as a body politic. That's why I started with parents. I've done so many tours and visits of different schools, and I try to go actually with parents because I'm interested in what parents will ask. And I don't think we do a very good job helping people who are going to send their kids to school begin to make demands of those schools. And I think that unfortunately principals and teachers are often on the defensive, and so we haven't figured out a way to say child, family member, school personnel, we're all in it together. And so I'd love to see some more work with what would that look like, because I agree with you, to change a culture is extremely difficult. And I love the notion that you're suggesting that perhaps this can break through all of those taboos, because I think any of us in this room could list the 1,500 taboos, and maybe that could be what comes next. But I hate that we right away go to the union as the enemy. The union's not the enemy. The union has probably in this country done more to break taboos than this movie would have time to explain. I was a union rep. I did more as a union rep to change my school culture because of the support of my union.
Well,
so I don't want to polarize.
As a 13-year member of the teachers union, I would tell you that
I can also
this
tell you
is
the
not,
bad places.
no,
of the
what
union.
I'm saying is I don't believe that it's not about the union from a standpoint of, and it talks very specifically about why unions formed and why they were very necessary. It does focus on one element of tenure in the idea that all boats rise together irrespective of performance. So it's not taking on the union, it's taking on the concept of what you were talking about of accountability. That's really what the focus is, because going to the world you live in, cultures evolve, or if they're stagnant, revolution occurs instead of evolution. And education has been relatively stagnant. So we're at a point of revolution, which is where this buildup, this pressure point that we feel, which means that things that have historically never been allowed to be on the table, In New York, as you know, it's illegal to evaluate a teacher based on test scores. There are 15 states that have restrictions that limit the evaluation to anything but seniority. So there are some fundamental things that have been off the table that are going to have to go from all parties, everybody, that are going to have to go on the table.
Why evaluating teachers, to me, that's a very black and white. I wouldn't want to be evaluated by test scores, and I was an excellent teacher.
I'm not suggesting that that test scores are an answer. What I'm suggesting is that there are things that are off the table. We talk in big platitudes in the education. Educators, we always talk about children and what's best for them and everything else. And then we immediately go into a huddle in a protection mode. Instead of saying everything's on the table, what's the right model? What's the 360 approach that takes teachers and parents and community and seniority and all of those things together to look at how we should evaluate performance.
So that goes to your question of culture.
Absolutely.
So that's the same. I think we are saying in some ways the same thing. If you can say to all of the actors, what are the central questions, right? We did a very interesting thing when we founded our school. The school's leadership team included our director of student support, which in most schools is unusual because we wanted to make sure that the artistic, the academic, and what we called the wellness component had the three-legged stool. And that notion of the person who's really in charge of that at a leadership level, not under anybody, was really critical to us. That was a different way of asking the question of how do we take care of families and kids. So
Paxton, sorry.
We, as I think I may have mentioned, our school was part of a network called Uncommon Schools, which is a group of charter schools in New York and Newark and Boston recently. And to your point earlier about the sort of hero complex, one of the things that we spend a lot of time thinking about in our network was replication. And I don't mean replicating schools, I mean thinking about what's working in our schools and figure out how to share the things that are working. And one of the things that in my last year at the school we created was a culture tracker. And essentially we had an idea where we felt like we had hundreds of thousands of little tiny things that happened every day that we were thinking about that we thought contributed to student and teacher culture. We didn't really know how to quantify it. We didn't really know like kind of what that looked like, but we thought, for lack of anything else better to do, let's just write them down and sort of see if there's any trends in what we're learning. So this is everything from, you know, having a supply closet where teachers don't have to check staplers out. They can just walk in, get a stapler, go back to their desk, staple, keep the stapler. This is everything from having floors cleaned or having college banners in the hallways that are or having homerooms named after colleges. In fact, 2 years ago, if you would have gone to our school, you would have found 26 fifth grade students from Brooklyn saying that the only college in the world they wanted to go to was University of North Carolina at Greensboro because their teacher went to UNCG and that was the name of their homeroom. So anything and everything that we thought had some kind of connection to culture, we wanted to capture it on this document. Now, the obvious next question is, well, so what do we do with this, and why does this matter, and how do we, and where do we take this? For us, it was about sort of celebrating and documenting the things that we thought made our school special. It was about the stuff, and every school, doesn't matter whether your district or charter, has things like this. I mean, some of you have probably read about Brockton High School here in Boston, who's been in the news recently about the amazing results they've had with 4,000 kids and 300 teachers. Now, as a director of operations, I cannot imagine managing 4,000 kids and 300 teachers, and there are wonderful people that are doing that. But essentially, from my 3 days of learning about Brockton and kind of understanding about, you know, some of the research that Professor Ferguson has done, is that essentially this is a culture change. This is a culture change in the school of creating an environment of excellence. And so, you know, I think for us, you know, we, as on the leadership team, went back and forth on this culture idea. You know, we thought, well, you know, is it the interim assessments? Is it the great curriculum? Is it the unbelievable teachers? Is it the uniforms? Is it the student recruitment? Is it all of that, some combination of it? And for us, you know, when you put that in a black box and you mix that around, and, you know, black box or not black box, whatever, you put it somewhere, you pull it out, and one of the things we think that we saw was we saw a culture explode in our school of of it's cool to be smart, it's cool to have all your assignments in, it's cool to go visit NYU, it's cool to win Matt Merits, which was one of the rewards that we had in our classroom in order to be able to participate in the auction where you could buy a skateboard. You know, there were a lot of different combinations of that, and I think, you know, I went to an event the other day and I heard a guy from the city of Boston say that in their office they had this sign that said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." And you know, I don't know how that really applies to my school, but I do know that the culture piece, both students and teachers feeling like it was the only thing in what they wanted to do in the world was to create a great classroom. You know, that was my goal, and I really worked in service to that. You know, the principal and I were there to sort of create an environment where that happened and where the focus could be on your classroom and on your kids, period, full stop.
Something I found interesting was this statistic that in X number of years we aren't going to have enough skilled labor to, yet we didn't talk about, at least it didn't seem to be implied, that could also be teachers in classrooms or trained teachers in classrooms. And I think one part of the puzzle that seems to get away scot-free is the post-secondary, where do teachers go to be trained? And I'm thinking here now, how do we become, as institutions of post-secondary education, how do we become partners? Because in all of the conversation today, it really hasn't been mentioned, except for where the tenure system came from, which we seem to have invented. And then I'm curious, your thoughts about what is the role of the post-secondary education system in this country.
One thing that's interesting is a third of the teachers are going to retire over the next, it's going to turn, just based on just age and timing, that the, you know, these 3+ million teachers, 1 million of them are going to, over the next 10 years, change. So it's going to be the most dramatic shift in teaching. So there's actually an earthquake happening in ed schools across the country because of the fact that everything that they've been taught has been under attack because they've done this conventional 4-year undergraduate, then a 2-year, you know, you get your teaching credential, knocked sideways by Teach for America and some of these other programs of direct in the classroom that you've talked about. So they're now taking a look at of really becoming, really shifting the way that they're training teachers. But there was something that was mentioned that I think you mentioned, or maybe you'd mentioned about Finland, and that is the issue is if the top third are going into education, and in our universities, the bottom third, generally are running towards that career, there is a shift that goes beyond the ed schools. Right. It's about the profession itself and the impact. Because the heroes aren't Jeffrey Canners, they're the teachers in the classroom. You ask any kid who's, any of us, who do we remember? Do we remember our principal? Or do we remember that one teacher, that two teacher? Those are the superheroes.
But one of the interesting things, I was the one who mentioned the Finnish thing, because one of the absolutely kind of, I was aghast at this. In Finland, there are no standardized tests till 9th grade. None. Yeah. And when you ask teachers, I almost couldn't believe it. And I kept asking everywhere I went. And I said, but you have standardized curriculum, right? No. Every teacher in Finland, kindergarten through 9th grade, selects their own curriculum. They have national standards, but no thing about, I kept pursuing that question. That's so different than what we have.
So do you think, though, it's, and then I'm going to open it to questions, that it's the autonomy in our system, the lack of autonomy, that's keeping bright college kids from...
Michelle Reese says that it's this huge bureaucracy, and we don't pay very well. It's all about money. They pay really well there.
Yes, please.
I want to say something following this lady. No,
Linda.
It's not about money.
Excuse me?
No, it's not about money.
What's it about?
I'm a school teacher of 20 years. I came from China. I got my master's degree in China. I work for the United Nations. I work for the air transport industry. I came here to do my PhD. I've been a teacher for 20 years, and I get 6 certificates. I'm a business owner. I'm a mother of 3. And I think as an experienced teacher, as an outsider, and I think I can see something maybe an outsider see most of the game. It's not about money. America is rich enough. American schools are provided with lot of materials. Other countries, including China, I grew up in the 60s and 70s and 80s. There's no way, but they produce a person like me. First of all, I agree. Are you Jim Burke?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Great pleasure to meet you. I like his word. I like
If you
his
weren't,
word,
was she going to say she wasn't happy to meet you?
I like his word revolution. I like his word change in the culture, change in the attitude. And I remember I studied sociology, and we do the campaign, the sociology words. And campaigns could be a little bit taboo in China because we use a lot. But on the other hand, it does do its job to bring a change. America needs a change in the attitude towards education, and need a change in math learning. Math learning is one example. Teachers, even if they are 60s, 70s, they are not good in math learning and teaching. They ruined our children. I am a teacher and going to different classrooms because of my special job of ELL, and I help the students. Most of the teachers, they don't know how to teach math, and they don't know math. And elementary school teachers, they'll say, oh, unfortunately, I'm not good at math. I'm good at reading or language arts. So to follow the movie.
Do you want to ask a question of one of the panelists?
No, I want to say unions need to go.
Okay, thank you. Does someone else have a question?
Yes.
Please, over here.
Can I just
Sorry.
say one question?
After, let's have someone else have a question, and then...
This is something that I want to leave.
No, please, because this person here, thank you. Please, go ahead.
Hi, I'm from the Ed School. A couple of things, and like Linda, I don't want to critique the film because I know you have a rhetorical purpose in there that is not to, start discussion with Ed School grads and policy wonks and things like that. It's a different idea. But I did want to point out that this seems to me to be, at best, evolutionary and in no way revolutionary. And I wish that if you were going to blow the bugle, that you had really blown the bugle and had said, well, what about informal ed that is everywhere? What about the entire community getting involved and showing examples of that? I think there are 3 or 4 pillars you could have really hit that would have said, let's think outside of the box, as a matter of fact. I mean, in Britain, for the last 5 years, they've been developing a plan whereby they were going to rebuild all of their schools. So they brought in all their stakeholders to talk about what would a learning environment look like, not a school, by the way. And kids were fundamental in that discussion. As was technology, of course, and I'm a technologist, so that's a good thing. But we don't even talk about the environment that they walk into every day. And while we had kids, we saw it was really sad to see them not get in the lottery, but we never talked about what would engage them. Because in the end, all of this is fine, but it's student engagement. And it's not student engagement with teachers, and it's not teachers' engagement with parents. It's student engagement with their learning. You get that, and you win the game. So I just wanted to say, and my question, I guess, to you would be,
Yes.
if you, and I'm assuming that your sort of social campaign afterwards will include some of these kinds of things where, this is a catalyst to start the discussion, but by no means is it the end of the discussion. So I'm assuming that's available. But if you could pick one thing that would be absolutely revolutionary,
What would it be?
what would you choose it to be?
Great question.
Right, and the first part of your comments, there are so many amazing things that are happening. There are so many grand, dramatic things that are happening. Let's begin with the end in mind. A filmmaker makes a film and they set out to create something that people will emotionally connect with. So they have a finite amount of minutes in which to tell a story and capacity of people to absorb. So now you have to try to explain something as complex as the entire American education system, which, by the way, could be a 13-hour miniseries, and you'd only still touch 10% of it. And so you have to basically give people a basic understanding, because what happens is if you overload them, what they end up going away with is, I can't even figure this out. You know what? I'm just going to go have a beer because it's, there's nothing you can do, and I'll lock my doors. And so we had to bridge that gap between this despair and hope and denial. And so what Davis set out to do was to try to use it's a vignette. That entire movie is just a vignette. It's one set of stories wrapped around some basic headlines about some of the most basic things. For me, as a former educator, and from doing, oh, I don't know, about 100 of these so far, and being invested in this now for years, I can tell you from my perspective, as only one person's opinion, the singular thing that has to change is one of accountability. There is no accountability in the, and I'm not pointing at teachers now, I'm pointing at the system. Right. A charter school doesn't perform, they close it. They shut it down. All right, that's happened in LA. They just shut down 4 of them a week ago. They run out of money because they don't spend it right. They run out of money. They go out or they have to be absorbed or bought. It follows more of a capitalistic approach. And I'm not suggesting that the whole system should shift to that. Or that charter schools are the answer. I'm just saying that there is no accountability other than we tried hard and we care.
So
to me, it's absolute accountability. A principal who isn't performing at whatever the metrics is determined by the community, the solution, whatever that is, shouldn't be there. An administrator shouldn't be there. A teacher, a custodian, anybody else, whatever it is when we're talking about children, if they're not performing on whatever we define as performance, they can't, as Michelle said, you don't get the privilege of teaching our children or being around education. That's just my opinion.
I was sort of curious what your one thing would have been. That's a great question.
Well, I guess the top one thing would be the blending of formal and informal education and using the community as an incredible resource, both in, buildings and, social capital and intelligence and all of that kind of thing. Gotcha. I think that's
more revolutionary.
It's
right.
Well,
it's more visionary.
It shouldn't be. It should just be common sense.
This woman at the back.
Film as a tool for social action. And filmmaking, and particularly the documentary film format, it's a fairly political process as well, because within the trade-offs of what stays in the film, what data we cite, there are issues around that vis-a-vis the film, which has a fairly emotive pitch. I mean, this particular film, since we're talking about these children and their stories. I was wondering if you could reflect on your experience producing these movies and just being involved in the documentary film format, about the trade-offs that are involved between how nuanced can we get, because everyone's going to constantly criticize the film for not depicting reality or arguing for a more nuanced solution, vis-a-vis the film actually being more accessible and emotionally coherent for a person who doesn't know that much about the American education system. For instance, I'm from India and I didn't know that much about American public schools, and this was an introduction to me, and it's a fairly emotional introduction. But then I'm wondering, listening to everyone else here, there are trade-offs involved because you choose to cite certain data, interview certain people, and how do you make those decisions? And it's a complicated process.
In this particular film, Davis actually created 2 films. He created a film about the system, the charts, the adults, and then he followed these students. By the way, he followed the students. He had no idea whether they'll get in or not. He had no idea. It might have been an entirely different film. That's just how it turned out. It could have been, and so as a storyteller, he has to build. Now, as a documentarian, to your point, they operate to a higher standard, self-imposed by the community, where they look at themselves as the fifth estate. Documentarians actually look at themselves as truth tellers, whether they have a bias that comes out in their filmmaking, and obviously there's no way you can not. You always end up with some sort of bias or view of things. For Davis, what he wanted to do in this particular film, or We Did in Food Inc., or The Cove, or any of these, is you try to find a story to tell. You need an actual emotional story. You've got to, think of it this way. If they showed you a picture of an operation, for the average person, they couldn't watch the blood and gore, or a slaughter of a cow, let's say. They couldn't watch that. So then what happens is you start to, what does a storyteller do? They have you turn that cow into something that's humane, into having human emotions and feelings, so you have an emotional connection. And then they try to evoke some sort of pain or something so that you have some compassion for it. But then they won't cross the line and show you the guts being ripped out or these types of things. Why? Because then the audience they shut off. They say this is too much. Well, in a documentary like this, Davis's sensitivity was about amount of information, because he knew that people could get overwhelmed. Remember, the average audience member doesn't really understand about they only know about their school. They're experts at their school and their children. Most are very much an expert at that, but nothing beyond that. So that was the one piece of it, that how much information can you give to make the point, to get them interested, engaged, and recognizing that education is important and I better own it. Because if I don't own it, that's going to affect me, even if my kids are fine. So that was why he put himself on the line. He told his story as a filmmaker. That's why he, right up front, said, my kids don't go to public school. And I'm one of the ones who have, who are talking out of both sides of my mouth. And so he put himself out there. So that's the storytelling piece of it. And then the other is you just can't push an audience beyond their comfort level. If you go to a horror movie, you're ready for horror. If you're going to a light comedy, you don't want horror. And so for this point in a document, that's why you saw the use of music, and you go to the pop things, and and the song from Green Day, American Idiot, and those scenes, and the Simpson piece, and what are those? They're meant to break up and keep the pace, because if this was just watching Anthony for 2.5 hours, or watching Daisy, after 15 minutes or 20 minutes, you'd be so upset because you've connected with her, you basically would excuse yourself to the restroom and not come back. And so it's really trying to create all of this method in which I can impart information and also have you emotionally connected, because that's not the answer. A film is not the answer. A film is only designed, Philadelphia, Grapes of Wrath. We could go through films that matter, films that make a difference. They're meant to spark an awareness and an interest, and then all the social actions just meant to give you a menu of things. So if you go to waitingforsuperman.com/action, you'll see a menu of things that have nothing to do with what's in the film. They're about all these organizations, people working, different platforms, and the idea is because maybe now you're interested. So that's what's happening. So after Oprah, 500,000 people went to the website in one day. They didn't have to. It wasn't sign up for a free vacuum. It was they went because there was an interest that occurred. I need to find out more, and that's what we have to do. And then it's up to the NGOs and the policy and the reformers, because if that film says to 10,000 people, I want to be a teacher, it's the ed school's responsibility to transact on that. If that school sends more people to teach, the film sends more people to teach America. But also the intangible is, and we can't measure this, so we don't count this on our own checklist of return on social capital employed. I don't know if anybody who saw this film today will vote differently the next time there's a bond measure for facilities, or a particular politician who talks on their reform piece. You might know a little bit more, and you might shift your thinking a little bit to say, you know what, that was bull, or I agree with that. All of that is that collective knowledge that starts to come out of having an emotional experience. So now, just like a piece of music transports you back 30 years, hopefully there's something in that film, if it caught you, and it never catches 100% of people, and it catches them in different degrees, if it catches you, you then now have some connectivity where it's just going to make you feel a certain way of why I have to do something, why I have to listen a little bit more, why I have to pay attention on that particular issue. So that was really the purpose of Davis.
Time for
Davis's mouth.
one last question. This gentleman here in the blue shirt.
Last 3 years, I've been on the steering committee of three schools in Rochester and the board of our own common school, Rochester Prep. What I've seen is the destruction of school system, and being on the steering committee, and I'm not saying the Boston unions are like this, but I would say that the contract is a terrorist document, and I've seen criminal negligence by the union. Our system is it's protected by silence, by union propaganda. Is there any way that you can get this film into every church in Rochester and Boston, New York, every Rotary, every community organization? Because if we're really going to change things, it has to be the entire community that sees this, that understands it's not the parents' fault. It's tenure, seniority, due process, and work rules.
Yeah, there is a multi-million-dollar national campaign to take this out across. It's actually a very large religious outreach, because the interesting thing, a piece of this film has you know, Bill Gates, Ford Foundation, yet on the right, then on the more liberal side, Fisher and Broad, and so you have those moderates, and then it has Phil Anschutz, and then it has Robin Hood, and it has all of these foundations that have come together. It's almost like the animals that usually eat each other, but they'll come to the watering hole because they respect that's the common thing that they all have to have, so that's kind of neutral territory. Well, that's what the idea of the film is. So we've got this group of 160 NGOs and this outreach. This film will play at every state legislature. We will trot out a celebrity. We will, you know, you'll get 50% of the state legislation and the State Board of Education, and we'll do it sometime over the next 12 months at a time when there's key legislation coming up at the legislative level. Again, we're not controlling the legislation. We're not suggesting. We have nothing to do with that. We're not policymakers. But we want to use the film as a transactional moment to try to give a push. The other piece of this is, and this is what, like for instance, this film, we're bringing in 50,000 people in the targeted communities in New York and in Chicago just from funders who've come forward. The idea of bringing not to, again, the people in this room, but to the actual people who only have one choice, their local school or a lottery, because they can't opt for private school, move, or spend extra money, and so for them, we want them to rise up in a sense of saying, look, you must fix my local public school. Again, that's the key. How it's done has been done in a myriad of ways. And by the way, there are union contracts that are becoming more progressive. You're seeing them in Denver, you're seeing them in different cities, and there's going to be all this turn of contracts. And so if now we're opening up to talk about things we never talked about before, accountability for administrations, change in control, that, to me, I will tell you, the statistic that still knocks me in the gut, which I did not know until I actually saw it in the transcript, and then we, obviously everything is, you know, checked heavily in the research piece, is that if you take that 6 to 10% of those lowest performing teachers out of the classroom, what happens? The amount, I mean, we're not talking about 30 and 40% of the teachers and double the amount of money per student. We're talking about shifting just the personnel in that classroom, because they are the most powerful people in all of education, teachers. I mean, look what happens, where we go from where we were to where we would be. That's amazing. And you can do that in single-digit years, not decades. And you can have a transformational shift in the system. And it's not picking on teachers, actually worrying, because you know this. You know who hates bad teachers more than anybody, more than parents, kids? Teachers. Because when that teacher screwed up in 8th grade, I have to try to fix it in 9th grade. And so as a high school principal of 2,600 kids, you know, and having a fine arts magnet in the school, I can tell you that it was the teachers who were the most adamant about fixing those things. And so now, am I anti-union? Personally, no. Do I believe contracts should exist? Absolutely. Do I believe in the concept of job security, for performance and things? Absolutely. Should everybody be treated the same? Not in this country. Not in a society that wants to be the best in the world, and the most powerful country in the world.
No, I agree with you. I agree.
Really quickly, that your point about when you try to change a system in your systems thinking, if you could figure out, maybe it's not the 3 revolutions, maybe it's 3 levers that you change, right? And those are the 3 that get you 75% of the way, right? And that would be one of them, because that is an astounding statistic.
And by the way, just so you know, in the last week alone, to Randy Weingarten's credit, and I say this absolutely to her credit, she has been at every major panel, sitting there debating across from Michelle Rhee, from Jeffrey Canada, you know, and this is happening all across the country. Union reps are coming out and debating this I'm talking about hundreds of places. There are hundreds of Facebook groups forming. There are these communication chat rooms, these Take Back My Community, all of these things starting to happen. So if the timing's right, we might actually get some real revolutionary change in the American education system.
Linda, Jin, and Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I agree.
The visitor, the kite runner, the informant, countdown to 0, and obviously waiting for Superman. Among Jim's many careers, in a previous life, he served as principal of Alexander Hamilton High School and was the youngest principal in the history of the Los Angeles Unified School District. Jim believes that a good story, well told, can truly make a difference in how one sees the world. So welcome, Jim.
Thank you.
And last, and obviously you've got a big fan entourage here from the applause, Thaxton Lundy, who is a second-year master's in public policy student at the Harvard Kennedy School. He's focusing on education policy, social innovation, and city government. He began his career as an associate in Chancellor Joel Klein's correspondence office at the New York Department of Education, and obviously he was featured in our film more prominently than you let on before.
I hadn't seen it yet.
Mr. Lundy spent the past summer exploring his policy interests, first addressing teacher absenteeism for the Pittsburgh Public Schools Office of Talent Management, and then designing and implementing a citywide public service and volunteerism initiative for the mayor's office in New Orleans. So, Jim, Thaxton, welcome. So I'm going to actually start with you, Jim, and I'd be interested if you could walk us through the social action campaign for this film. And how do you think of or conceptualize a campaign, and is it possible to identify common interests of every successful campaign?
Good evening, everybody. In terms of the campaign, it really starts at inception when we look at the types of films that we want to make. And we kind of, in a little bit, we're a bit of a fortune teller in a sense that we look at what's percolating out in terms of a pressure that's building in terms of certain issues. And when we identified education, which obviously I have a personal background in history in, and we approached Davis Guggenheim to make this film, and coming off the success that we had with An Inconvenient Truth with Davis, we figured which are less important to me. Right now, for instance, there are over 10,000 people that are debating across all of our platforms online on about 15 different topics. There's 150,000 people who've already signed up who are specifically targeting to become activists in their communities. That's the pledge meter that if you go on, you'll start to pledge. There's a series of almost $15 million of monies that are then driven by those pledge pieces. So we look at actual financial support. We look at legislation and laws and changes that occurred. We look at, well, the film covers what you saw in Washington, D.C. in the Union. Well, surprise, there's now a new contract in Washington, D.C. where the teachers are now judged in a different way, and there's a break in that piece of tenure. The rubber room is closed in New York. Teachers are still flying around, but the rubber room was closed. You're starting to see a break in some of the system, in some of the negotiations across some of the district systems. So those are the types of things that we look at. And then we actually have an independent university and a research body actually audit the film and take a look at the results and the impact that occurred. So it's pretty extensive.
Terrific.
Called a return on capital, return on social capital employed.
I love it. I love it. Linda, I maybe want to move to you as we talk about how this film begins to have an impact. And where do you see this film, as we kind of think more about our local Boston community, where do you see it having an impact on education outcomes for us? And what do you hope that it will accomplish here in the Boston area?
Well, first of all, when I found out that you made Food Inc., my opinion of this movie changed. So I got to see it last night in the pouring rain. And I just want to make sure I do a shout out. I know it's really terrible to shout out about your own book, but my kids are really waiting for the royalty money. So you really do have to wait. The money is going to my students. And they have all sorts of
Did you bring any with you?
No, I couldn't, but it's in all the bookstores and it's in paperback and it's cheap and now you can go get it yourselves. So what I would say, I would add how I would want to see this movie change education is I would add to your 4 things. So I would say,
in 25 cities, we have a massive national presence with waitingforsuperman.com, which allows you actually get involved at a local level. You can get, through the mobile texting, which you would have seen on the end credits, you actually are able to follow what goes on based on where your phone is from. It'll give you updates of what education policy is going on in that area. You can then speak to a specific person to find out specific things you want to do. You can find out the ratings of your local schools. So every school in the nation is rated. You can find out, there's a series of letters that you can write to both governors and your representative senators that are based on Common Core standards and other educational activities coming up. We'll do probably 300 screenings across the country, including 50 state legislators. And then what you want to do is you're trying to create this moment of inspiration. And I'll finish up. And in this moment of inspiration, you want to get people to activate. And then with that activation, you're then want to transact on that activation and getting them to be emotionally connected. So the first piece is you have to become inspired. And then if you're inspired, then we want to give you the tools to become active and get involved. We're not a solution-based company. We're not partisan. We don't have, and I'm sure there'll be questions about the film being pro this or anti that. But for us, the issue is if on a Thursday night you're talking about education across multiple schools at Harvard University, that's what we wanted. If it all week long it's on MSNBC, if the President of the United States is talking about education Monday, if people across the country are talking about this, if Oprah's running 2-hour shows on this, if Larry King spends an hour on it last night, that means education is raising up in its visibility. And we fundamentally believe that with the campaign, we have to put enough pressure on the system not to tinker with it, but actually to do some very dramatic change.
So how would you then go about measuring? I'm hearing a little bit, but how do you measure that you have been successful?
We'll look in every film we do. We look at specific measurable results. So we'll look at laws passed. We'll look at amount of people are active or staying engaged and involved. We'll look at all the what I call the passive measurements, which are letters written, all of the those types of things. He'd be the perfect guy if he can take on global warming. He can take on the American education system, and he ran out of the office screaming pretty much. He said, "There's no way you can take on this topic. It's a big blob. It is unapproachable. It is unfixable. It's too big and abstract for people to get their arms around." And if you know Davis at all, once he gets his, you get a bug in his mind, he can't let go of it. And so over a period of weeks, he came back with his producing partner, Leslie Chilcott, and said, "All right, I'll take it on. Here's the deal. You have to greenlight a film. I don't know what it's going to be about. I can't tell you what the topic is. All I know is we have to let the world know about the American education system, which I need to tell you I don't really know that much about. Other than the film he had made looking at 4 first-year teachers called First Year. So at the same time that Davis started to really immerse himself in the research on the issue, we started to immerse ourselves in terms of what type of coalition could we build for a film of which we have no idea what the film is. And as Davis was collecting footage and developing his ideas and concept and getting a sense of really where the focus of the film would be, we started to coalesce a group of NGOs who are both experts in the reform movement, experts in policy, and now there's about 160 of them actually involved in the social action campaign. And we developed what we call pillars. So 4 principles that we think are the common foundations of what will be a massive national social action advocacy campaign. In this particular case, it focuses on literacy, it focuses on innovative schools, it focuses on great teachers, and it focuses on rigorous focus on standards. And then behind those are actually specific goals that are created within those goals. Drop the literacy, it's a decreased an improvement rate of 10%, or 30 schools passing Common Core standards and fully implement 30 states and fully implementing them, or additional removals of caps of innovative schools and charters and magnets and other programs that demonstrate success. And the program then becomes like a political campaign. So we actually have field operatives.
So everyone is being a little bit shy, but I'm going to invite our panelists to come up and sit down. And I'll just spend a few minutes introducing each of them. And I have a series of questions that I'd like to pose. And being the moderator, I get the privilege of being first to go. And then I'll open up the questions to the rest of you, because I'm sure you all have interesting things to say. I'm still kind of digesting everything that went on. It was a very heavy film, and I'm still feeling the drama of the lottery at the end. That is quite something. So first of all, we have Dr. Linda Nathan. Hi, I'm well, nice to meet you. Who's the founding headmaster of Boston Arts Academy, the city's first and only school for the visual and performing arts. Under her leadership, the school has won state, national, and international recognition Boston Arts Academy sends over 90% of its graduates, all residents of Boston, to college. Dr. Nason was also a driving force behind the creation of the Fenway High School, recognized nationally for its innovative educational strategies and school-to-work programs. She's co-founder and board member of the Center for Collaborative Education in Boston, a nonprofit education reform organization dedicated to creating more equitable, democratic schools. She's been recognized through many awards and fellowships, including being named as a Barr Foundation Fellow for her work in social entrepreneurship and leadership in 2007. And she received the Godine Medal for service to the community by the Massachusetts College of Art and Design. And her book, The Hardest Questions Aren't on the Test, Lessons from an Innovative Urban School, is to be released this month, I believe.
It's out. You
It's
gotta buy
out.
it.
Go and buy
Go to
it.
the school.
Absolutely. Make it happen. So welcome, Linda.
Thank you.
Next to Linda is Jim Burke. He's the CEO of Participant Media, a global media company focused on entertainment, which inspires social change. And I want to talk to him a little bit more about this. Participant has released 27 films, including Good Night, Good Luck, An Inconvenient Truth,